All right, now let's get into the Epstein files. I want to put out a huge thank you to Jared, who helped research and fact check everything you're about to hear. There will be a link to the document with all of the sources he gathered in the description. So let's start here. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier, but his origins are strange. He grew up in Brooklyn, never finished college, somehow got a job teaching math at the elite Dalton School in Manhattan in his 20s, and from there parlayed a connection with the student's father into a job at Bear Stearns. He eventually left under a cloud of regulatory violations and started his own private wealth management firm. But here's the thing. While he did have a few known legitimate wealth management accounts, almost nobody could explain where most of his money came from or who most of his clients actually were. He had a Manhattan mansion, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James, a ranch in New Mexico, and a luxury apartment in Paris. His social circle included heads of state, Nobel laureates, royalty, and presidents. Ghislaine Maxwell was his longtime girlfriend and closest associate, the daughter of British media tycoon Robert Maxwell. Prosecutors eventually described her as his chief recruiter. She was convicted in 2021 and is serving 20 years. On August 1st, 1 week after an interview with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, Maxwell was moved into a minimum security prison camp in Texas. She received a special waiver as sex offenders are not supposed to be allowed in minimum security facilities. The abuse pattern that emerged through survivor testimony and court documents is consistent. Young, often economically vulnerable girls were recruited, sometimes by other victims who were paid per referral, and brought to Epstein's properties under the pretense of paid massage work. Many were minors. The first real legal reckoning came in 2008 in Florida, and this is where accountability first broke down. Federal prosecutors, led by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, negotiated a non-prosecution agreement, an NPA, that gave Epstein a horribly light sentence, only 13 months in county jail, with work release 6 days a week. Critically, the NPA also granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators, people who were never named, never charged, and never had to answer for anything. Epstein was arrested again in 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges. On August 10th, 2019, he was found dead in his cell. The official ruling was suicide. Surveillance footage reviewed by the DOJ reportedly shows no one entering Epstein's cell tier from the common area that night. However, his cell door was not in the camera's field of view.
Now let's talk about the files themselves, because there's a lot of confusion about what's actually out there. Documents have come out in several waves. In January 2024, a federal judge unsealed 4,500 pages of a civil defamation lawsuit, Jeffrey v. Maxwell. These included depositions, exhibits, and correspondence. Nearly 200 prominent names appeared. Both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump were mentioned, although neither was accused of direct misconduct in these documents. The main value was confirming the scope of Epstein's network and the credibility of survivor Virginia Giuffre's account. In February 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi was asked on Fox News if the DOJ would be releasing a list of Epstein clients, and she said, "It's sitting on my desk right now to review." Later in the month, she declassified about 200 pages, including flight logs and a partially redacted contact book. There was significant hype around this release. MAGA influencers and commentators were literally brought to the White House for a binder handout, but most of it was largely publicly available already. In July 2025, the DOJ and FBI released an internal memo concluding there was no client list, no credible evidence of blackmail, and that Epstein's death was a suicide. But that memo was controversial, and critics argued it was disguised, designed to close questions rather than answer them. In November 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with near unanimous bipartisan support, rare in this day and age. 427 to 1 in the House, unanimous in the Senate. Trump signed it. It required the DOJ to release all remaining unclassified Epstein files within 30 days. But I think most of us knew that wasn't going to happen. On December 19th, 2025, 30 days after Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law, the DOJ released its first batch under the act. It was heavily criticized because hundreds of pages were entirely blacked out, including a 119-page grand jury document that was completely redacted. A bipartisan group of senators called it a violation of the act itself. On January 30th, 2026, over 3 million pages, including 180,000 images and 2,000 videos, were released. The DOJ said this was its final release, but the DOJ had already identified 6 million potentially responsive pages, meaning roughly 2.5 million pages have still not been released or accounted for publicly. What's in the January release? Email chains, text messages, FBI interview summaries, internal DOJ correspondence about the 2008 non-prosecution agreement, financial letters, flight manifests to Little St. James, and property seizure records. And what is in the January release that was unexpected and absolutely unacceptable? Full, unredacted victim information, including names, faces, email addresses, and even nude photos. Other criticisms included the sheer amount of redactions of and about powerful business and political figures who were alleged co-conspirators and material witnesses. What's important about this is the redactions were supposed to protect the names of the victims and nothing else. The names of the victims are unredacted, and the people being protected are the perpetrators. Those are exactly the right questions. Let's get into what's being hidden and why it matters.
Here's the core issue for advocates and accountability activists. The documents confirm a pattern of institutional failure, not just individual criminality. The 1996 FBI tip. A survivor named Maria Farmer complained to the FBI in September 1996, nearly a decade before Epstein's first arrest, that he and Maxwell were engaged in child sex abuse. Officials reportedly took no meaningful investigative steps. If that complaint had been acted on, hundreds of victims would have been spared years of abuse. The FBI never formally recognized Maria Farmer's original report, but the December 19th release included her official report to the FBI. The 2008 NPA immunity clause. The non-prosecution agreement gave immunity to unnamed co-conspirators, literally everyone connected to Jeffrey Epstein's heinous child sex abuse. Survivors and their attorneys argue this was designed to protect powerful people. According to a visual guide to the files that have been released, produced by Al Jazeera, dataset 9 of the files contains email evidence and internal DOJ correspondence regarding the 2008 non-prosecution agreement, but remains highly redacted. There will be a link to the Al Jazeera visual guide in the description. The redaction problem. The law said redactions should be limited to protect victims' information, avoid releasing any child sex abuse material or material depicting death or physical injury to a person, not jeopardize an active investigation, or release properly classified information regarding national defense. But critics, including the senators who wrote the act, say the DOJ has used these rules for allowable redactions as cover for redacting information about powerful business and political figures. There were also disappearing files. After the December release, at least 16 documents reportedly disappeared from the DOJ's website, including one that contained a photo of President Trump. According to PBS, the missing image showed a desk with photos in the drawer, including one of Donald and Melania Trump alongside Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The DOJ said the documents were removed because they showed victims of Epstein and they would be reposted when appropriate redactions were made. Some were later restored, including the photo of Trump. The 2.5 million missing pages. The DOJ said the January 30th release was final and that it had met its legal obligations. But the DOJ's own accounting identified 6 million potentially responsive pages. Advocates are asking what's in the other 2.5 million files? Who decided they didn't qualify and under what standard? Why does this matter beyond Epstein himself? Because the Epstein case is a window into how power protects power. A man who openly trafficked minors for decades was able to do so because law enforcement was warned and didn't act. Prosecutors let Epstein off with lesser state charges and gave his associates complete immunity. Institutions that knew stayed quiet or failed to investigate. Money and social access created layers of insulation. It is still controversial to say, but likely true across the board, that many people knew or suspected that Epstein was actively engaged in the sexual predation of children, but did and said nothing. It is widely known that Epstein said, I was Donald Trump's closest friend. And Trump said of Jeffrey Epstein, I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. In recent news, Melania Trump made a statement where she denied being Epstein's victim, denied that Epstein introduced her to Donald Trump, said her name had never appeared in court documents or FBI interviews, and stated she had no knowledge of his abuse. Even Trump said he didn't know what she planned to say, and several White House aides were stunned by the timing since the Epstein story had largely died down amid the war with Iran. Some White House officials speculated she was trying to get ahead of something, though sources close to her said she had simply grown increasingly frustrated by online speculation and wanted an on the record denial, with her lawyers also believing it could be legally helpful. The question accountability activists are asking isn't just who else was there, it's how do we make sure this can't happen again? And you can't answer that without transparency about what the institutions knew, when they knew it, and what they chose to do or not do.
So what can people actually do? Stay informed from primary sources. The DOJ's document library is at justice.gov/Epstein. These links will all be in the email and description later. The House Oversight Committee has its own releases. Bloomberg's reporting on the 18,000 emails from Epstein's Yahoo account is well sourced and documented. Avoid relying on social media summaries. Go to the documents themselves where you can. Support survivor-led organizations. The people who have been fighting this longest are the survivors and the attorneys who represent them. Organizations like the Survivors Justice Center do direct work on trafficking accountability. Pressure for the remaining documents, the 2.5 million pages the DOJ hasn't released. There are senators and representatives calling for an audit of the DOJ's compliance with the Transparency Act. Contact your representative if you want to amplify that pressure. Find out whether your members of Congress vocally support releasing the remainder of the files or staying silent. and contact them to keep pushing them or to say thank you, and you've got their back when they do the right thing. Distinguish what's confirmed and what's contested. One of the most important things we can do as an activist community is be rigorous. There are real documents backed by findings here. There are also a lot of unverified claims circulating. Our credibility depends on knowing the difference. Finally, support press freedom. A lot of what we know came from investigative journalists, the Miami Herald's Julie Brown, Bloomberg's reporting on the emails, the Wall Street Journal, as well as independent media sources. That work matters.
What I keep coming back to is this. The Epstein case is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented, prosecuted, and partially convicted criminal enterprise. The question of who else was involved and whether they were protected is not speculation. It is an open legal and evidentiary question that the documents themselves raise. Demanding answers to it is not fringe. It is accountability. Thank you for being here tonight. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.